Thanks for checking out this video, and if you'd like to find out lots more information about the other courses and workshops I offer both in person and online, simply visit my website at peterkeegan.com. Hello, I'm Peter Keegan, and today I'd like to show you my approach to painting a flower scene in acrylics. The image that I'm going to be working with today is a beautiful scene of some quintessential English roses. We have a very strong light coming from the top, casting some really dark and deep shadows on the brick wall behind it. And these really delicate pink flowers are surrounded by very lush, vivid green foliage. And I want to try and capture this using fairly expressive brush strokes, but still maintaining the sort of delicate and soft quality of the roses. So let's have a look at the materials we'll be using. So I will be using acrylics on my palette, and the way I organise my acrylic paints is from my warm colours on the left hand side to my cooler colours on the right. So starting with my warmer side, I start with titanium white, and I'm using one yellow today, which is an cadmium yellow, lovely warm deep yellow. Then I have my two warm reds. I've got a cadmium red and an alizarin crimson. So those are the warm side, and then going to the slightly cooler side, I have a burnt sienna, which could also technically be used as a warm colour, but I'm putting on the cooler side today. So I've got my burnt sienna, a sap green, and then a darker viridian green, which will help me with the shadows, a French ultramarine blue, and a little cerulean blue as well, just to give me that lovely light purpley quality to the roses. And the darkest colour I have is a raw umber. Now there'll be quite a lot of dark, particularly in the shadows of the picture, and I won't use black. I find black too polluting and too staining. So I will use a mixture of the raw umber, the blue and the green, maybe with a hint of crimson just to warm it up to give me some of those dark, deep shadows. Now the makes and the brands of paint, as you can see, are all very different. I have a range from the Winsor & Newton Professional range, Liquitex Heavy Body, and also Systems 3. This painting will work with any type of acrylics, and you could interpret it with oil paint as well. Other studio essentials will include a jar of clean water. I've got some masking tape, which I've put the picture up, the canvas up. I have a set of rags, some baby wipes to keep my fingers nice and clean, and my brushes. The brushes I'm going to be using today are the Rosemary & Co. Ivory range. They are a nylon brush. They've got a wonderful bounce. They're very, very stiff, allowing me to apply lots of paint. And there are a range of sizes from 12 all the way down to number 2, and a few sizes from filbert, the lovely round, flat-tipped brush, and also a few flat brushes as well. The surface I'm going to be working on today is an acrylic canvas paper, which I've cut to be approximately about 40 centimetres by about 20 centimetres to give me the sort of lovely pillar box effect, so I can have a nice rhythm and design to the painting. So that's all my material set. Let's start our painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is to prime my canvas and give it a base colour, just to kill the white that's glaring at me at the moment. Now the colour that I choose to put on, I really want to sort of radiate through the final picture. Now, which colour do you choose? Now, that's a really difficult question, because any colour would really work. It really depends on the final quality of feeling or atmosphere that the final painting would have, that you'd like the painting to have. Now, I've got this lovely stark, lots of bright white, so it's obviously a very bright sunny day, but then I've got the sort of the cooler, darker shadows in the background, which is actually on a brick wall. Now, to save me having to paint sort of brick wall colour, I'm going to make the base of this painting a sort of a warm rusty brown, a burnt sienna colour, and that will serve two purposes. Number one, that will give me that effect of a brick wall in the background without me having to actually paint it, and number two, that warm orangey colour will hopefully radiate through the picture. I'm also aware that you've got the lovely bit of green foliage in the picture, and that green foliage on top of a sort of a reddy orange background, a lovely kind of complementary, they're opposite colours on the colour wheel, and should hopefully make the painting just a little more interesting and more dynamic. So I'm going to pick up my 2-inch flat brush, and let's put a little bit of water onto the palette, and let's bring in my burnt sienna, maybe just a hint of raw umber as well, and let's sort of get this completely covered. I don't want to make this too thick because I'd like the surface to dry fairly quickly, and I don't want it to be a flat colour, so as you can see the translucency of this burnt sienna, you can still see the white of the paper come through, and you can also see these lovely marks as well, and hopefully there'll be elements of this left towards the end of the painting. So once you have that painted, I want to start looking at the composition or the design of the painting itself. Now, you don't have to worry for that base to dry. You can go straight in and mix up a different colour. So I'm going to mix up a sort of a very dark pinky brown, because that's going to be a colour that's going to work quite a lot. Actually, put a bit of green in it as well, just to make it a little bit darker. Now, I want to think about the design. Now, I'm not going to copy the picture exactly. I do want to change it, because compositionally, the photo isn't particularly interesting. You've got this mass of roses on the right-hand side and a mass on the left. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I want your eye to travel around the picture a little bit more. Now, I quite like this mass on the top right-hand side. I think that's a good starting point. But instead of having the roses on the left pretty much on the same plane, I'm going to knock them a lot lower. So I'm going to have them featured in the bottom left. So hopefully there'll be this nice rhythm where your eye will go from here and it will kind of sweep down and maybe flick back up and look up to the roses. And in the adjacent corners, the top left and bottom right, hopefully that'll be a lot darker. So you'll have this lovely balance of two dark areas and two lighter areas. So you don't always have to let the photograph dictate that composition. If you need to move things around, do so for the benefit of the picture. And it's a lot easier to do with flowers as well, because it doesn't really matter where the flower goes in comparison to, say, a big garden scene. It's sometimes harder to do, but with flowers, it can be a lot easier. So using that thin mixture, that thin brown that's still got a bit of water in it to keep it nice and fluid, I'm starting to describe the shapes of the flowers. Now I'm trying to sort of mass them all together, if you like. I'm not drawing individual petals, but I want to get a suggestion and feeling of where each rose will be. So I've got my first rose happening in this area here, and I've got one here. You notice I'm not drawing the individual shape yet. That'll all come as the painting develops. I've got an excellent little tight bud there, just nestled amongst the three main star roses, and you've got this one there. So I'd say that's my first area, and that's my first section. Now I want to sort of bring this design a little bit lower, so I think I'd have to have this sort of, roughly speaking, somewhere in this plane here. So this rose is touching this, so let's bring this a little bit lower instead, like this. So I'm going to have this main rose just featuring here, followed by the second over here, and that bottom shape here. I'm trying to really sort of break it down into fundamental shapes as opposed to thinking of them as flowers, just these really interesting structural shapes that I can use to guide the eye. So I'll have some leaves up here and sweeping down here, and then maybe just a hint around this one. But then all this area I think would work quite nicely if it's in dark shadow. So I think as a composition, for me, that's all I really feel I need at this moment. And I might put some more in a little bit later, but I think as it's at the basic fundamental level, that's all I really want to do. I've got my strong section on the top right, leading me down here and just slightly mapping out where the foliage will go. Now, if you need to spend a little bit longer drawing out that composition, you take as long as you need, but don't be tempted to draw out individual petals, because you'll be tempted to fill them in up to the line at a later stage. Instead, try and lay on just some simple marks that will guide your brush to give the impression of flowers and petals as opposed to filling in. So once you've got your composition in, we're ready to start blocking in our darkest tones. So to block in the darkest tones, I'm going to pick up a number 1.5 inch flat bristle brush, and I'm going to start blocking in and getting those dark tones in. So let's get straight into it. Let's take some of the raw umber, the French ultramarine blue, and the viridian green, and make a really, really dark mix. Just a hint of water, just to lighten it up a little bit. and let's start putting it on. Now straight away, hopefully you can see already that the warmth of that underpainting, that brown, is coming through these broken brush strokes. I don't want to completely obliterate it, so I'm very conscious not to apply the paint too thick and too heavy. I'm scumbling these marks around, almost like a dry brush effect, to allow that bottom layer to come through. So let's put some of it down here. And of course, lots of this dark will have elements of the green laid over it. Fantastic. We'll just put just a little bit more just up where this bud is here. Now, using a big brush is quite an important part to this blocking in, because by the end of the picture, what I'm hoping to have is a lovely range of marks, really exciting marks, from very, very thick, wide bristles like this to very, very thin, tight ones, which will pick up the description of the roses. So don't be tempted to do this with a small brush. Get the biggest brush in your pot or your box that you've been scared to use all this time. Get it out and use that to do all the work for you. So I think that's pretty good for my base, all those lovely darks. So let's start painting up some of those leaves. So let's jump to now a number 12. Here's my number 12 filbert brush, and we'll get straight into those deepest, darkest greens. So using my palette, I'm still using this dark mixture, and I'm going to move slightly away from it to these greens. So I'm using a sap green here at the moment, but still mixed in with that lovely dark mixture. So it's a little bit mixture of the green and a hint of umber and blue, but slightly more biased to the green. And let's start putting in these marks. Now, of course, what we're trying to do is create this illusion where I'm not really painting leaves. What I'm doing is I'm just making marks. And these marks are just going to give the impression of there being leaves without me having to really consciously worry about painting an individual leaf. You want to allow the viewer to do a little bit of work themselves to try and pick out what is there. So by merely just laying on these lovely bold marks, describing a vague appearance of leaves. When the context of the roses are painted, people know exactly what they are without you having labouring over specific shapes and the veins and all those other qualities that we know there to be in leaves, but you've not needed to paint them at all. Everyone else would have painted it in their mind, freeing you up to really play with some fantastic brushwork. So going a bit lighter, I've just added a little bit of the titanium white into this mid-green mixture. Just take that back a little bit, just using my fingers just to rub it away. You notice I'm holding my brush right on the very edge of the handle, and that's really pushing me away from the picture and stopping me getting too close, which will stop me getting too fiddly and too fussy. That'll be the thing that really stops the picture, or stops a picture having vibrancy and excitement, is having your nose too close to the canvas. Okie dokie. So those are my greens laid on. I'll go back later and I'll clarify them a little bit more. I want to get some of the darks in now of those roses, those sort of deeper, dirtier colours. And so I'm going to start off with, let's get a bit of the titanium white just to get me started, and the alizarin crimson, the French ultramarine blue. So we're going into a very deep colour. I've brought in a little bit of the sienna and indeed the cerulean blue as well, so we've got this really dark colour. It's a sort of a warm mauvey colour, and I can start putting this on to describe some of these base shadows. Let's put a hint of green into it for this one over here. There it is. And just a little bit more French ultramarine blue, just to give me the darkness that it needs. That's it there. Back to this mauvey colour. So what I'm doing is I'm standing back and I'm really squinting down. I'm trying to identify not individual roses, but clumps of tone and shadow. So I'm trying to describe as much as possible of these shapes and these areas. So it's going to get slightly yellowy and greener as we go down to the bottom petal. Down here, a little bit more blue, so we're going to bring in the cerulean blue. And let's just bring a bit of crimson into that mix. Then as we get up, it gets a lot cooler and bluer. Up here. And just a hint more cerulean. You'd never believe that there'd be this much blue in a painting of pink flowers. But it's there, you just got to look, you've got to really closely observe those colours. And let's just put a suggestion of something going on down there. Maybe something down there as well. Okay, so I think that's a lot of my darkest tones across the whole picture. So once you feel like you've mapped out those using big brushes, pushing yourself back, I'm ready to now develop those mid-tones, those richer, bright pinks. So with my bright, hot pinks, I'm going to start bringing in the alizarin crimson and the red now, a lot more deeper. The white will always be used just to calm it down just a little bit so it doesn't get too hot and too intense. So let's have a little look at that. That's about right. So again, the same principle, holding the brush out far and squinting down. And trying to describe as much as possible with as few well-placed brushstrokes as possible. Let's just get that lovely deep bud there, just in the right. So I think that's a crimson with a bit of green. That's my guess. Let's try and see how that looks there, just nestled in there. Yeah, that's about right for the dark, but it could do it being just a little lighter, or a bit more intense. Let's bring in that crimson just a little bit more. There you go. I'll just sort of pop that little bud there. Just use my finger just to take that away. And just dragging that brush around, particularly where the edges are, just so they sort of soften and disappear into that background. Okay, so let's just take it up a tone. Let's just bring in my titanium white into that same pink mixture that I've made using mostly crimson, a hint of the cadmium red. And let's start being a little bit more careful now where I'm placing these highlights, because it's when the highlights are applied that hopefully the picture should really start coming together and start to describe the impression of these roses. Now I'm not using pure white. This is still a very dirty kind of pink. It's got that base pink in, but it's even got a hint of blue in it as well that's still remaining on the palette to keep it very consistent. again, I can't stress that the importance of just squinting down and trying to describe it as loosely as possible. Just take the heaviness of that there, just with a finger. If you don't have to use your finger, you can get a rag or a cleaner brush and just use that just to wipe the edges away. But if you don't mind getting messy, then your finger's sometimes the best tool for the job. So let's now creep up to this side up here. Now there's not a lot of paint on my brush. Hopefully you can see as I'm laying it down, it's sort of creating this lovely dry brush effect, that scumbled effect. So it's not heavy with paint, and there's certainly no moisture or liquid water in this. And that's just going to give me a lovely variety of mark making. Let's just get a little pinker. So that's with the alizarin crimson. Oh, lovely pink, that really hot candy floss pink looks fantastic. Put a bit over here as well. Marvellous. Wipe off that brush and we'll go up a little bit lighter again, so bringing in more white. So we're very much creeping into our highlights of this little sketch. Let's look at the pit. Let's look at the roses up here. And again, I'm still using the same brush. So this is a number 8. Never be tempted to get out those smaller brushes just because you're working on something so small. You'd be amazed what you can do with a larger brush. It will require you to be a little bit more considered of where you're placing your marks, and sometimes you can end up producing the most detailed work with a very good sized brush. And this same white, let's take it on this side here. Just a hint up there. Okay, now I'm going to put that brush down in the water. I'm going to pick up now a slightly smaller brush. Let's go for this. Let's go for my number 6. So I'm already dropping down one size. Let's just look at some of the darks in these roses, particularly those lovely centre, the heart of the rose, just to make it nice and strong. So using the alizarin crimson, I use a hint of blue just to deepen it. I'm looking at these lovely bits here, these lovely little intense pieces of pink, which are right in the very heart of the roses. Whoops, a bit too much blue there. Let's just take that away. Now the one on the right is a lot softer. It's not quite as intense as these two on the left, but you have got these lovely little shapes. I'm just going to make this rose a bit bigger so I can little better understanding of it. And we've got quite a dark little bit, which is all the dark little bits behind it here. Okay, so let's now do the same for the roses on that left hand side. Let's pick out that lovely intense deep flower. Now these have an orangey quality because you can see the stamen on the inside. So let's just make this, put a little bit of the yellow in there. Little bit of raw umber then, just to make it a hint darker in that centre. There you go. And then let's get a bit lighter as we move out. Just bring a little bit more yellow into this. So we're going to make a sort of almost an orangey pink, and just to get that lovely blush of orange in there. There you go. And then as we get to the one on the right, it is a little bit more in shadow, not quite as bright as the ones above it. So down here it's just a little bit more in shadow. Just going to get a hint of water on the brush. That'll just allow me to be a little bit more precise in the placement of those. Okay, let's now describe the shape of that petal on the left just a little bit more accurately. So let's bring in some cools. So a little bit of the French ultramarine into these pinks. We'll cool it all up. There you go. Just looking at that one here on the right, could do with just a hint of shadow here. I'm just going to clean that brush off, and I'm going to bring in some whites now, and I'm going to work a bit thinly now. I'm going to bring some water into my palette and titanium white, and I'm going to just sort of soften the edge of these petals on the left hand side just so they sort of disappear into that background a little bit, and it gives everyone a sort of sketchy quality. And again, not too much paint on the brush. Like so. Let's look at now some of my greens and get some of those leaves in. So let's bring out my white, cadmium yellow and sap green. Hint of viridian. There you go. And let's just sort of find couple of these leaves. Maybe start with a bit of a darker section first, actually a bit more blue and umber, and the viridian. There you go. A bit deeper. There you are. And go a bit lighter now. I want to make that section on the bottom right just a bit darker, just to stop your eye disappearing down here. I just want to make that a bit stronger. So partly from a design point of view, it'll hopefully pull your eye back up into the picture. And also by making it slightly darker just around the edges of those white, bright petals, hopefully it'll make the white of those petals stand out just that little bit more as well. I'll just take away the intensity of that a bit and replace that with a bit more of a vivid green. There you go, that's much better. Just again do the same up here, just take some of the intensity away of that light. You've got that lovely effect where you put light and dark right next to each other. You get a really strong dynamic impression that light and dark come together, and it really draws the viewer's eye and engages you into the picture. So I've blocked in a lot of all those lovely mid-tones, the lovely cool purple shadows and those hot pinks. The last thing I want to do, just to really bring it together, is get that lovely kick of bright white and bright sunlight that will hopefully really finish the picture off. I'm now going to use some pure white just to bring out the main petals and tips of these flowers and hopefully really bring the sunlight shining on these flowers. I've jumped down to a size 2 brush, obviously just to give me that little bit more precision to the painting. So if you make a mark that you're not pleased with, because we're working with acrylics, it's very easy just to sort of take it out, move it around and pop something back in its place. That's why acrylic is really the perfect medium for this. I just love how the light just hits just a couple of these petals just down below. I think that's lovely. So it just disappears into the shadow there. Marvellous. And let's now look at those lovely roses on the right hand side. And let's just take a hint of this yellowy green. I think this petal here just needs to be a bit more, there you go, a little calmer with a bit of green in it. I've lost one of those little buds, so let's get that little bud back, because I do quite like this little bud that's just sort of poking his head out here. So using the green and that crimson just to make a darker pink. Using the crimson and the green just to make a little bit of a darker pink, just to give the illusion of that little bud peeking through. Oops, let's just put that away actually. I just want to soften this area into shadow just that little bit more. So I'm going to jump back up to my number 6 brush, and again just using a thin wash, just sort of drag the bristles over it. just so it knocks back just a little bit. And finally, I think just to bring it together, I just need to finish off those leaves. So these are the very lightest, palest parts of these leaves. So using a combination of the sap and viridian, yellow and white, sort of laying them on top of the parts of the leaves where I've done in mid-tone. Now it's at this stage where I'm very aware that I don't want to overwork the picture, but I want to make sure that I maintain the design and the rhythm through the whole piece. So I'm still, if you like, I'm still drawing and mapping things out where I want to, I'm conscious to lead your eye in and out of the picture. Marvellous. And lastly, I'm going to just put some finishing touches. I'm going to take out a rigger, which is a fabulous brush, very, very long bristles, very, very good for getting stems and lines. There's just a few of those sort of nestled and hidden amongst those roses in the shadows. So I'm taking quite a bit of water into the paint. And again, you can use this, whether it be a bit more expressive and free-flowing, or whether you're specifically describing the direction of features. And of course what this also does is it adds another mark, that very thin linear quality to the painting. So with the addition of those very slim rigger marks has really, I think, brought it all together, where we've got this lovely rhythm, where we've got the eye being drawn hopefully from the top right down to the bottom left. You've got a lovely range of mark making. You can still see that lovely warm sienna coming through, blocked in with those dark marks, the leaves, and then looking at those lovely deep purples and pinks for the roses, and that highlight put on slightly thicker with the paint brings it all together. So I hope you enjoyed. That was my approach of painting some roses in acrylics.